Okay. So as you guys know, the exam is next Tuesday from 3 to 6, and it's covering the last 4 chapters that we covered in the semester. So it's not cumulative. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to interrupt me. We're just going to go through the general topics of each chapter, and then we could do the practice questions. Okay, so for social psychology, we have nonverbal behavior. So that'd be like body language, facial expressions, the facial feedback effect, attributions. So that would be like personal and situational. So can anyone give me like an example of a personal or a situational attribution? Anyone?
I guess,
Okay,
oh,
I'm
I was
sorry,
saying,
what?
so the main example that I've seen is like if somebody fails a test, they'll blame it on, if it was personal, they would blame it on themselves, right?
So if they were attributing it to themselves, they would blame it on themselves. If they were attributing it to like an external source, it would be like they blame it on the professor or something.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Do we have a situational attribution example? Yeah. Hernan said blaming someone who's driving slow on them being a bad driver. So that would be a personal. Do we have a situational? So personal would attribute something or behavior to the person's personality, who they are. Situational would attribute it to like environmental factors, things that people can't control. So like the exam, someone couldn't study because they had an extreme circumstance, so they failed the exam. Or in bad driving, someone is rushing through, someone's cutting traffic lights and whatever because they had an emergency, something like that. Or yes, Ashley said they're driving slow because it's raining. Exactly. Now, do you guys remember what the fundamental attribution error is? So it kind of depends on both personal and situational. Okay, so the fundamental attribution error is basically uh, misattributing a person's actions that might be situational based on their personality. So even though someone might have had extreme circumstance where they couldn't study for an exam, you're saying that they failed the exam because they don't know how to study or they're not smart enough or something like that. Does anyone remember the actor observer bias? So it would be like the exact opposite. So when you're attributing stuff to yourself, you're basically like rationalizing it, making excuses for yourself. The exam was too hard, or I cut the traffic light because I was late for work, or something that you wouldn't necessarily attribute for someone else. And then we have stereotypes. Do we remember the difference between prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination?
Yeah, isn't discrimination like an action, like an act? Like the act.
Yes. Awesome. So what would prejudice and stereotypes be?
There would be, well, a stereotype, that's a, it's more of like a thought of, like a, not a thought, but like an opinion you have of someone already.
Yeah, so it would be like the cognition of it. And then what would prejudice
Yeah.
be?
Well, someone in the comments said like prejudging, and I agree with that. Like a belief.
Awesome. Sorry, I haven't been looking at the comments.
Okay.
Prejudice are negative feelings towards a person or group. So yes, prejudice would be like the emotions behind it. Stereotypes would be like the cognition, and discrimination would be like the behavior. So an example that we often use is like if we see a person of color in a store at night, and suddenly like a person starts feeling cautious or a little defensive, that feeling would be the prejudice. If they start thinking that the person is going to harm them or the person has a gun or anything else like that, then that would be a stereotype. And if we start like holding our money closer to us, or if we walk away, that would be discrimination. Do stereotypes necessarily have to be negative? No. Awesome. So something like overestimating, for example, like an Asian person's intelligence, or a man's able to like do physical activities, or a woman's emotional range, anything like that, you're overestimating it, but the person still not be able to reach those standards. So it would be a stereotype. And then in-group and out-group biases. Do you remember those?
No är frivillig med det då.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Nu är jag sugen. Nej, det är lagt med.
Okay. Does anyone remember in-group and out-group biases?
Well, isn't in group more of like the group we tend to belong to, and then
Mhm.
the out group is like the other groups we don't identify ourselves with?
Awesome. So you basically favor the group that you're in, and
Vad fan är det?
you disapprove of the other group a little bit more. So it would be anything like as simple as like rooting for like a sports team. If your sports team does well, you would think, oh, we did amazing. But if another sports team does as well, you're like, okay, they won for you, something like that. And then social identity would be the group membership that is important to you and how you view yourself in it. So basically, how you identify in the group. Okay, now we have attitude. Do you guys know what attitude is? I'm sure you guys know what it is.
Is it not the way you act? Kind of.
So yeah, an attitude would be the feelings and the belief that you hold and how it might like affect your behaviors. So okay, it's a little easier to explain with an implicit and explicit perspective. So implicit would be kind of the unconscious or the things you don't realize about yourself, and the explicit would be the things you do realize. Do we kind of understand that? Did that make sense? Okay. Cognitive dissonance would be when you're having trouble like differentiating or choosing between two different cognitions or two different thoughts. So, for example, I know smoking is unhealthy, but I still want to smoke. Did that make sense?
Wait, could you describe it as like kind of a conflicting thing? Because you think one thing, but then you do another. Kind of like
Exactly.
that.
So
Okay,
you
yeah.
have two thoughts that conflict with each other. So you're not really at rest until you're able to decide between one of them.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm sorry, what?
No, that just made sense. Thanks.
So I don't want to study, but I want to get a good GPA. You're gonna kind of conflict between the two until you're able to decide on one. Are we good with cognitive dissonance?
Yes.
Okay. And then the two roots of persuasion. Do you remember what those are?
I forgot them.
So there's central and there's peripheral. Central would be if someone's trying to persuade you to do something based on the content of what that is. So I want you to buy this car because it's a really good car. it has great mileage, and the company is really good, and so on. Peripheral would be being influenced to do something based on anything else that doesn't have to do with the the thing that it is. So like again with the car, I want to buy the car because the commercial looked really good for it, or because a celebrity uses the same car, or my friend uses the same car, or anything like that. It's not about how good the car actually is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Ashley, Hernan, and Wendell are going awesome in the comments. And then influence. So the difference between social facilitation and social loafing. We usually use like a group project for an example for these. Do you guys know what they mean?
Social facilitation is like when your performance increases just because other people are around you.
Awesome.
And social loafing is like just because you're in a group, you tend to work like less harder.
Yeah, so you tend to get less or feel like less responsible for everything. Awesome. So for example, I just had a friend offer to like study, do like a group study session. That would be social facilitation because we think that we're going to do more when we're together. Whereas social loafing, if we have like a group project, then I wouldn't do as much work or contribute as much responsibility than if I do the project on my own. Same idea. De-individualization kind of follows along with the responsibility, as is the bystander effect. So everyone uses the example of like if someone got hurt on the street, you would feel less responsible to help them because there's a bunch of people around you. So one of those other people could help. The individualization would be feeling less of your identity because you're in a group. So that would be like the crowd mentality. Do those make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we understand everything this far up.
We had a question that said, what are the 3 factors in the group in the chat?
The 3 factors would be source, sorry, source, content, and receiver. So who's doing the persuading, who's being persuaded, and what are you being persuaded for? I think it would be a little more important to focus on the roots of them than the actual factors, but just to keep them in reference. Yes, the self-fulfilling prophecy. So self-fulfilling prophecy would be like trying to find proof that you're right. So say, for example, I'm doing a study on lazy people and not wearing their masks. I would look for any proof that backs up my hypothesis rather than just doing the actual experiment or the research. I'd be looking for exact proof that my hypothesis is true. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, conformity, compliance, and obedience. Let's first try to mention the studies of each. Do we know who Ash was and what his study was?
I know he did the conformity study, but that's about it.
Okay. So Ash put up 3 different lines with different sizes, and he asked people, yes, exactly, the line test. He asked people, like, are these 2 lines the same length? And when other people would say yes, even though they weren't, the other people in the study would say no, or I'm sorry, would say yes. So they were conforming with everyone else, even though they knew that it was wrong, or they knew that their answer wasn't right. So normative conformity is when we would conform just because we want to be like everyone else, we want to be part of the group. Whereas informational conformity would be, or no, wait, was it information? Yeah, I think it is. Where you conform because you think someone else knows better or they know more than you. So, for instance, we don't cheat on exams, but say, for instance, someone is cheating on an exam. Looking at someone to your right and copying their answers, you would be conforming with their answers because you think they know more. So that would be informational. Whereas if you're just doing like a group project and everyone's going along with it, you would go along with it not because you think that they know better, but because you just don't want to disagree. Did that make sense? Okay. People were saying the line was a certain size because others did even though they knew they weren't. Exactly. So they said they were the same because they didn't want to look like the odd one out. Exactly.
Yeah, I would confuse this study with the Milgram study. So I guess by definition, I know what the difference is.
Yeah. So do we know what Milgram studied? Excuse me.
With the, it's okay. Was it the study with the shocks, and they would be instructed to, you know?
Yeah. So Milgram actually studied this after World War II to try to understand why people followed the Nazis. So it was about obedience, trying to see if the person in charge kept telling you to do something, even though you knew it was wrong, would you still do it? So every time someone got something wrong, like a score wrong on a test, the person would be told to shock someone on the other side of the wall, and they would keep increasing the shock until it would become fatal. But they still kept doing it because it was obedience. Awesome. So that would be obedience. Uh, Obedience and compliance go together. And do we know Zambardo's experiment?
I don't think so. Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, the prison experiment. So people were put into, I forget what university it was. They used like a university basement, the Stanford, awesome. Uh, they separated people into prisoners and guards, and they tried to differentiate the roles. I think it only lasted like a week, or it got really cut short because the roles and the responsibilities started to get confused, or tried, like, they started fading away. So then it ended up becoming crazy. So that would be a part of the deindividualization, or yeah, deindividuation. I can't pronounce it, I'm sorry. So are we good on that, on those topics?
Yes, I wrote down definitions.
Awesome. Okay. Aggression. Aggression and what is it called? Temper. They kind of go together. So temper would be kind of like your base level of emotion, not your temper. I'm sorry, I'm looking for the right word. It'll come back to me. I'm sorry. Uh, Temperament. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. Temperament is like your base level of how strongly you feel, how strongly you react to the things around you. So aggression would be how social and cultural factors affect how you feel and how you react to it. So frustration and aggression hypotheses would say, like, the more frustrated you get, the more aggressive you're going to get. And that's going to affect how you feel and how you behave. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. And then pro-social behavior would be anything that you do to benefit society. Okay. And then for attachment and uh, relationships, what are some factors that we can do to develop better relationships? Whether
So,
it's romantic, friendship, anything like that.
how much in common you have with someone?
Good. So similarities.
Like, is it like how like friendly you are with them too?
Yeah, so I actually just listed all of them. Proximity, so how close you are to the person physically. Physical attractiveness, so before we even get to know the person's personality, we see, well, if we're not virtual, we see what the person looks like, their pheromones, anything like that. Personality traits, so that would also go with similarities, but not necessarily. How compatible people are. Exactly. And then, do we know the difference between passionate and compassionate love? So in a typical relationship, which one would come first, passionate or compassionate?
Passionate. Oh,
Passionate, awesome. So passionate's all about like how like lustful, how desirable, kind of like the honeymoon phase of the relationship. And then compassionate would be more about empathy and emotion and sharing all that with the other person. So we're good with social psych?
Yep.
Awesome. Anything I should go over?
I have a question actually. It's about the final exam.
I'm sorry?
I have a question about the final exam. Is it
Yeah.
okay? More or less like, is it gonna be like all the chapters after the midterms? Is it gonna be, or is it gonna have chapters before the midterm as well?
No, just after the midterm, so it's not cumulative.
Okay, so just anything after the midterm. Okay.
Yeah, the last 4 chapters.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, wow. So personality and self has a lot to cover. Self schema is basically how you view yourself. Self or working self concept is how your self schema is constantly changing. Self esteem is how you see how effective you are, how much you're worth. So that would be based on your standards of it. Sociometers would be how you compare that to society standards. So your self-worth based on other people's standards. Uh, so this would also be part of compatibility. I think it's listed here. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Does anyone know reflected reappraisal?
It's like when you believe your self-esteem is based on how others see you.
Yeah, so when you internalize what the people, what like the important people in your life base their values and opinions on you. So that it goes in comparison with sociometers. Uh, then viewing sense of self,
Can you
favoritism.
can you repeat what you said? Sociometer was.
Sociometers are the probability of rejection or acceptance based on society standards and your view of like your self schema and self-esteem. So how you rate yourself as part of society, your self-worth.
Thank you.
Awesome. Favoritism would be when you rate yourself or you tend to rate higher to boost your self-esteem, kind of. Downward and upward comparison. This is something that you guys should probably know for the exam. Do we know what the difference is?
So isn't downward when you compare yourself to someone, like let's say they're doing worse?
Hmm.
So you use it to kind of like justify that you're okay where you are.
Yeah, awesome. So I always think about it how like if you're looking up at someone or if you're looking down at someone. If you're looking down, then you're seeing yourself as higher to kind of like boost your self-esteem. If you're looking up, then someone is better than you and you're kind of like lowering your self-esteem. Awesome. Awesome to everyone in the comments. I'm trying to keep up. Okay. Self-serving biases kind of goes along with self-fulfilling prophecies. They're prophecy, where you're biased towards anything that's going to favor your opinion or your hypothesis or anything like that. Awesome. And then we have collectivist and individualist cultures. I think you guys had a assignment about this. So are we good on those, or should I go over them? Collectivist is group mentality. Awesome. And individualist are societies or cultures based on how each person stands out as opposed to part of the group. So each individual as their own independent. Awesome. Collectivist is where it's we before I. Yeah, so US is individualist. Japan is an example of collectivist. So westernized cultures tend to be individualist. Easternized tend to be collectivist. Awesome. Then we have, what do we have next? Psychodynamic. Going into sports, so that wouldn't go, sports wouldn't be necessarily a specific culture because each culture has its own sports. So sports events and stuff like that would go more into social psychology, where we're going into in-group and out-group biases. Did that make sense? Awesome. Psychodynamic is mostly about Freud. There's a whole class about this. The id, ego, and superego, basically how our subconscious affects our behavior. So our id would be more about just the pleasure principle, things that can benefit me, things that are going to take away pain. So this would be regardless of kind of morality. Superego would be a little bit more about morality, how you can benefit society and pro-social behaviors. And ego would be kind of like the reality between them. So reality principle would be applying what I need versus my morality, and then how we can problem solve with them. So it is kind of a tricky concept, and the book explains it a lot better using the different levels of conscientiousness or consciousness. But did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Defense mechanisms, there's like a whole long list of them, but I think only for this chapter or for this class, we're focusing on like 6 of them or 7. So denial, I think we all know denial. It's when you don't want to accept what's going on. So whether it's lying or anything that's going to avoid facing with that. Repression is when, kind of like how we used to say, you're bottling up your emotions or you're bottling up anything that you don't want to deal with. Projection is when you're feeling or thinking something and you're projecting it onto something else or someone else. So kind of like how you're mirroring it because you don't want to face it yourself. Rationalization would be kind of like making excuses or justifying actions, thoughts, emotions, anything like that. Reaction formation is kind of like, sorry, I'm trying to think of an example. Do you guys have any examples of reaction formation? So it kind of goes hand in hand with sublimation, but yeah, so you kind of emphasize the opposite of it. And I know that's kind of tricky to get the hang of. So for example, a mother doesn't want to have a child, but she has a child anyway. She's going to show over affection to that child because she actually didn't want them. I know that's kind of a morbid example, but did those make sense? Okay. Displacement is when Displacement kind of goes with catharsism, where you're taking your emotions or thoughts or anything else, and you're kind of placing it onto something else. So this also goes hand in hand with sublimation. So displacement would be something like violence, where I'm taking out my emotions onto something else that has nothing to do with it. So I got mad at work, so I'm yelling at my family. I lost some sports game, so I kicked the ball into like my neighbor's fence or something. Sublimation is when it's kind of like displacement, but you're doing it in a positive sense. So I was told like I'm not a good cook, so I learned to cook a lot. Or I lost this game, so all that aggression is gonna make me practice harder, so I do better in the next game. Something like that. Yeah, exactly. So being upset, or your boss yelling at you, and you being upset, and then you being angry with your kids. That would be an example of displacement. Awesome. So are we good with defense mechanisms? Awesome. Your book has a whole list, and you guys can use the book during the exam. It is open book. So the book has charts for almost every section, and the charts are really good at summarizing all this information in case you forget it. So I would have those available if you can. Psychosexual stages. The anal, I don't think you guys have to focus too much on the time periods, but just like a rough estimate, anal is usually around like 1.5 years, maybe 2, where everything is about like putting your fingers on your mouth, touching everything with your mouth, so on. Anal would be, that would be oral. Anal would be around the time of like potty training. Phallic would be when children start learning about their genital area. Latency is, there's usually not too much going on. You're just kind of in between stages. You're starting to develop social awareness. And genital would be, again, when you start learning more and more about your genitals. So Freud focused more about the psychosexual stages with fixation, where if there's some kind of like traumatic experience in one of these stages, then it affects behavior throughout the entire life. So, for example, if a person had an issue with, they had like a traumatic experience in their oral stage, they would have an eating disorder or a smoking disorder or anything like that. Fixation in anal stage would be, uh, for example, Freud was alive decades ago when homosexuality wasn't normal. So he would say an homosexual had a traumatic incident in anal. Now, psychology has evolved and we know different. Anal would also be like being controlling and something like that. Phallic would be like sexual disorders, like I lost the word, like fetishism and so on. And then the Electra and Oedipus complex. So it's basically the same exact complex except for males or females. Oedipus would say that, uh, do we have to know all of them in detail like that, or not in too much detail, but be aware of them. And again, the book has charts for all of these. So in case you do forget it or anything like that, you have something to help recall them. The Oedipus complex would say a male child would be jealous of their father and would be in love with the mother, and not just love her, but like be in love with her. And then eventually want to kill his father because he wants the mother. And then he'd be a little more realistic and he'd start copying the father's actions so that he could be like him to be approved by his mother. And then the same thing for Electra, but with women. Does does that make sense for psychodynamic? Awesome. And then the traits. So Eisnick's trait theory focused more on, where am I? 3 factors. And this chart is exactly from your book. Extroversion, or how social a person is. Neuroticism, or how much they feel what they feel. and self-control, how self-control they are, how much self-control they have. And this would base their entire, what's it called? Their entire personality based on these traits. Whereas the 5-factor theory, or the big five, uh, for this, they kind of gather like all the adjectives they can have for a person, and they split them up into 5 different categories. Usually it's called ocean or canoe as like an acronym. Whereas how open a person is to new experiences, how willing they are to try new things. Conscientiousness would be how aware they are or how in control they are. Yeah, this recording will be posted and the slides will be posted in case anything. Conscientiousness is how aware or on top of everything. So this would be anything from like cleanliness to schoolwork to anything like that. Neuroticism is, again, how strongly a person feels what they feel. Agreeableness. So agreeableness and extroversion kind of go hand in hand. I like to think of agreeableness is how much people like you, how much they relate to you. And extroversion is how much you like to be around people. And then the opposite of extroversion would be introversion. Does the trait theories make sense? Yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure the page, but it's all laid out in the book. So are we good this far?
Yes.
Awesome. More in social psychology or personality psychology. The locus of control, so internal or external, basically who has control over your life and your actions. Internal would be every decision I made is because of me, whereas external would be something else is kind of controlling this big picture. So God or fate or anything like that has everything already like planned out. Rotter's expectancy theory. How do you expect things to play out and the value of what you put on to play out? So, for example, I want an A in this class, but I expect around a B plus. But how badly do I want that A? Puts like, I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly. It's like how much value you put towards whatever's going on. So how much I value the grade in the class versus what I expect is gonna like lead to how much effort I put into it. Did that make sense? I don't think it did.
Yeah, I'm still a little bit confused.
So I'm expecting like a B plus in the class, but I value an A, or I want an A, so it would change how much I value in it. And then based on how much effort I put because of the value would also change what I expect. So because I value an A and I'm expecting a B plus, I would put more and more effort so that my expectancy kind of changes to get an A.
Yeah, that makes sense now. So kind of like self-interest too.
Yeah. So yeah, they both depend on each other. The more you value something, the more you'll work towards it. Basically, yeah. You guys explained it better than I could. Yeah. It's like a loop. And then reciprocal determinism is based on my personality, the environment, and behavior. So if the environment helps me, then I'm gonna help the environment. And if I help the environment, then I expect the environment to help me. And by environment, I just mean like society, the other people, so on. Are we good on social cognitive approach? Awesome. If you guys ever need me to explain anything or go back or anything like that, just let me know. Biological, we talked about temperament, It is heritable, so kind of around like the same range that our parents or possibly siblings, so on, their level of temperament or kind of like neuroticism would kind of affect ours as well. So it's not exactly the same, but around the same range. The reticular activating system, I totally forgot what it is. Can anyone explain the reticular activating system? Anyone? Okay, so I'll get back to you guys on that. I'm sorry. Biological approach or biological studies more focus on genetics. So twin studies, or more specifically monozygotic studies, help us understand how much of our personality is based on nature versus nurture. And then the same thing with adoption. So adoption would be how like our nurture was affected by different families versus what came from like the same parents, the same genetics. Humanistic focuses more on uh, how each person could be their best person. So kind of like disregarding all the baggage and negative things that we each do and focusing on the good. So person-centered approach. In therapy, that would be focusing on the person and their problem and not including anything outside of that. Conditions of worth is basically that. How much of our worth is conditioned based on external factors. So it would be like the opposite of unconditional love. So our emotions, our value is based on other things. That wouldn't necessarily be a positive thing, whereas unconditional positive regard would be like accepting or regarding person despite anything bad that they do. So the person themselves is inherently good. And then person and situation debate. So would be how we assess personality. So I'm going to start from the bottom just so I can. A study or a type of research method would be the electronically activated recorder. So it would be like this device that a person carries with them that wouldn't interrupt any of their daily activities, but it kind of measures how they feel and how they respond daily. Self-report measures would be like surveys or anything that the person themselves consciously speaks of. And that would measure their personality, their way of thinking, so on. Thematic apperception test. So this would be an example of it down here, where a person is shown like a picture and they kind of have to explain it to the therapist or psychologist, whoever's asking. And how they answer it would kind of reflect their personality. So in this picture, I could say the man killed the woman, or the man is crying because the woman died, or anything, they had like a one night stand and the man is upset. Anything that like reflects how I view it. Similarly, the Rorschach ink blot test shows a picture like this, and it asks people what they see. And again, that would reflect their personality. Okay. Situationalism. I'm drawing a blank on this too, so I'm gonna get back to you on that too. And then we have psychopathology. So in order for emotions, cognition, or behavior to be classified into disorder, they have to be deviant, so it's not social norms. It has to be distressful to either the person or people around them. Yeah, so where was I? Situationalism is when behavior is determined by situations more than personality traits, and interactionism is where I drew a blank. So I don't know how to pronounce his name, Michel's theory. Okay, thank you. You guys are picking up my slack. Thank you so much. So interactionalism is when behavior is based on both situation and personality. Awesome. Thank you guys. And then emotions, cognition, and behavior. When it's deemed dangerous, again, to either the person or people around them, and dysfunctional when the person can't go out through daily lives without said emotion, cognition, or behavior. And then you have mood disorders like major depression, persistent depression, and bipolar depression. So just know the general difference between them, how to specify which one is which. So major depression would need, I believe, like 6 months. Persistent depression would need like 2 years. And bipolar depression would have manic episodes or hypomanic episodes. And then know the difference between 1 and 2. So, excuse me, bipolar 1 would focus more on uh, manic episodes for at least 7 days, and bipolar 2 would have hypomanic for at least 4 days. Yeah, the time period and the severity for bipolar. Awesome. Schizophrenia has 5 types of symptoms. So know the difference between positive and negative symptoms. So positive is any emotion, cognition, behavior that's added to the patient that's not normally there. Whereas negative is anything that's taken away. So hallucinations, which is uh, distorting perception, so any of the senses, is not usually there. Delusions, where the person is believing something that's not real, that's not normally there. And then there's the different types of delusions. Again, there's a chart in the book that explains all of this. So for any recall, disorganized speech and disorganized behavior. So anything that's like rhyming or uh, grandeur bodily behaviors, anything like that, that's not normal. Or again, by normal we speak like normal like social norms or anything that classifies as deviant. And then negative symptoms would be anything like apathy or catatonia or anything that takes away from what the person normally is. And dissociative disorders. So these 4, disorganized speech, disorganized behavior, delusions and hallucinations are positive symptoms, and negative symptom is anything that takes away. Awesome. Dissociative disorders, dissociation basically means like to separate. So if you're separating identities or personalities, then that would be dissociative identity disorder. And like we just spoke, anything from bodily behavior to the 5-factor theory to anything like that would classify as different identities. Dissociative amnesia is when a patient kind of forgets a time period or a certain event regarding trauma. So they're kind of separating their memory, so to say. And dissociative fugue is kind of like the loss of memory and identity or identity. So say like I took a walk for the park in the park and something happened, like I lost all my identity. I didn't know who I was at the time, or that's obviously not a very good example. Did those make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So dissociative fugue is more about losing identity and memory at the time, whereas assuming a new identity or uh, not changing personalities, but having a difference in personalities would be Dissociative identity. Yes. So dissociative fugue usually travels. It usually involves travel. That's something to remember. Okay. Then we have anxiety disorders. So specific phobias, which is when there's a specific thing that causes anxiety, like heights, social anxiety. Social anxiety would be like embarrassment or feeling like you're gonna put pressure on someone else or anything like that. Agoraphobia is like the fear of like danger or basically something that leads the patient to confine in somewhere safe. That's usually like their home. General anxiety is anxiety that's general. So there's not one specific thing that's causing the anxiety. Panic disorder, which could come from a consistent panic attacks or having one panic attack and anxiety coming from avoiding further panic attacks. So you're avoiding specific places or emotions or people that cause that panic attack. And then obsessive compulsive disorder, which focuses on the patient is like obsessed with one or more thoughts and they're compelled to do behavior that takes away from that obsession. So the stereotypical example is I'm afraid of germs or cleanliness, so my compulsion would be to clean everything. And because everything is clean, that kind of obsession dies down until the anxiety starts rising again, and then I'm compelled to do that behavior again. PTSD, which revolves around trauma, obviously. It has symptoms revolving around the four groups of hyperarousal. So you're more aware, more conscious of everything going on around you. Re-experiencing, so this would be like flashbacks, dreams, not impulsive, like penetrating thoughts of the traumatic event. Mood and cognition change, so this would be like depression, anxiety, anything like that. And avoiding things that would trigger or remind from that traumatic experience. So are we good so far?
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm sorry if I'm rushing through, but we still have to review questions. Okay. Personality disorders, which are classified into three groups. Paranoid personality, which I think is a little self-explanatory. I'm sorry, whoever that was, can you please mute yourself? Schizoid personality disorder would be a detachment from social relationships and restricted emotional expression. And schizotypical would be thoughts, appearances, and behaviors that are disconnecting to others. So these would be all related more to odd behavior, eccentric behavior. Antisocial, which is often stigmatized. Antisocial actually means like sorry. Antisocial is like a disregard for other people's comfort, social rules, anything like that. You're not meant to know all of them in too much depth. Just know the general cluster. And again, there are charts for all of these. So what I would do is these are open textbook and open notebook. So you can have all of this in like a separate document or something. In case you forget anything, it's just right there to go to. So I would know generally what they're about, generally what each cluster is about, but not specifically in too much detail because it is an intro psychology class. But definitely reference the textbooks if you think you're gonna blank out or anything like that. Histrionic personality disorder is kind of like attention seeking. Borderline would be an unstable mood and personal relationships. So bordering on different self-images. Narcissistic would be narcissistic behavior, thoughts. Again, these are all normal behaviors normal thoughts, but they're taken to an extreme level. Avoidant personality I'm sorry, what? Okay. Uh, Avoidant personality disorder is kind of inhibiting your social relationships, feeling inadequate. Dependent is when a person is overly dependent on other people. And OCPD is kind of the stereotypical of OCD. So it's the controlling the anal behavior that people usually accommodate with OCD. And in child neurodevelopment, I don't think this was talked about too much, but I think there's like a general information. We all have like general information about what these are, but for specific information, the chart is in the textbook. I know I keep saying that, but it's probably your best reference. An example of a person with OCPD would be like Christmas decorating, for example. It has like the picture frame can't be tilted, or the lights have to go a certain way, or anything that's a little over controlling. So everything has to be organized in a specific way. Or for example, like paper filing, you have to have it like color coded and alphabetized. And again, these are normal behaviors that are taken to an extreme. So just because a person has these behaviors doesn't mean they have the disorder. It's just when they can't function because of these behaviors. Awesome. And then definitely know the definition of comorbidity. Awesome. Okay. And then we have psychological treatments. So psychodynamic theory, definitely know the different types of psychotherapy. Psychodynamic theory, which focuses more about the unconscious and dreams free association. So dream analysis would be analyzing dreams. And then free association would be a client just randomly speaking or saying, like, for example, I would say a couple words and you say the first word that comes to mind, and the therapist would analyze how that came out. I don't know if you guys learned about Freudian slips, which would be just basically any words that kind of like slip out, even if you don't mean to. And Freud would say that that has a specific unconscious effect on person's thoughts and behavior. Humanistic, which, yeah, so Freudian slip would be anything subconsciously coming out. Humanistic, we talked about humanistic psychology. That would go along with humanistic therapy, client-centered. Everything is about how the client is a better person, and everything else doesn't affect how good the client actually is. Behavior therapy would be trying to change maladaptive behaviors or dysfunctional behaviors without actually addressing too much the cognition behind it or the emotion behind it. Whereas cognitive therapy would be focusing more about changing maladaptive thoughts or distressing thoughts without addressing too much the behavior. So behavior, you would change the behavior and affect it and expect it to affect the cognition. Whereas the cognition, you would change how the person thinks about it or how the person feels about it, and then expect it to change the behavior. Whereas cognitive behavioral is when you're addressing both the cognition and the behavior. Group and family therapy, which would be anything like family therapy, bringing in the whole family and talking about it, or group therapies like group meetings, AA meetings, support groups, anything like that. And dialectal behavioral therapy is when you are addressing both. Sorry, I don't want to say anything off. Dialectal behavior therapy combines both behavioral therapy and cognitive therapy. So it's kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy, but it focuses more about the emotions and sorry, give me a sec. So it would focus more about kind of like rehabilitating a person into society. So this would be better for personality disorders. Biological therapies. So this would be psychotropic or medication and electroconvulsive therapy. So biological psychologies or psychiatric therapies or anything like that focus more about the neurology of it and how the brain is basically electricity and chemicals. So medication would try to correct the chemistry, and ECT would try to correct electrical imbalances. And who can provide different psychological therapies? I don't think you would need to know it for the exam, but there is the list. And then finally, any of these therapies, would a person need a disorder to seek out therapy?
Oh, no.
Awesome. So any distressful thoughts or emotions or behaviors or anything, even if it's not a disorder, you feel free to go to therapy. And again, Rutgers does have free therapy. It's already in your tuition. So, but then in anyone in general. Okay, so are we good for psychological disorders and treatments?
Yes.
Awesome. And then general information about plagiarism, just so there isn't any specific issues. You guys are able to use more of your notebooks and your textbooks and anything like that. You can research general definitions, but don't look up the question word for word. And for open response questions, there's really no need to copy and paste it. Put in your own original thoughts. No group chats, anything like that. And then review your general, like your homework assignments and everything that we've done previously in the semester. Yeah, you can use your textbooks and your notes. So we're good on not cheating.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Zambrano has made it clear that any academic integrity violations will be reported, and she really doesn't want to see any of the questions online or pictures of it or anything like that. It is 40 multiple choice. There's going to be 3 open response questions. You only have to do 2, but you should have time to do the 3rd one. And there's really no reason not to if you can get extra points for it. Yeah, most questions will be scenario based, so it won't just be definitions. So are we good for general exam information?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the exam like 3 hours like by itself, or it's like we have 3 hours like window to take it?
So the exam opens at 3 and closes at 6. So you don't have to start it at 3, but say you start at like 5:50, it's due at 6. So if you
So
started
how,
at 3, I'm sorry?
like how much time do we have for it?
So you have 3 hours. If you started at 3, you have until 6. But if you don't need until 6, you can submit it early. If
Oh,
you want to
okay.
start it at like 5 o'clock until 6, that's up to you.
Okay.
I do recommend starting it at 3, just in case you need enough time. But generally, Dr. Zambrano used to give out the same exact formatted exams, and students would only have like an hour and a half to complete them, and they would be able to. But
Okay.
I would definitely use the 3 hours if you need it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay.
Oh yeah. When is this gonna be posted? Like this recording?
Once I can download it and process everything on my laptop. So probably
Okay.
tonight, if not tomorrow morning.
Gotcha. Okay.
Also, Dr. Z is holding a Zoom during the exam, so if you guys need any, like, if you have any questions, make sure you go and you ask her. She'll be available.
Yes, we're good.
And will you guys be posting the Kahoot?
Yeah, so we're gonna post the slides and then the link for the Kahoot is in the slides. I know we're taking a little longer, so if anyone does need to go or anything like that, hopefully we can finish everything on the slides today. But if you want to do everything on your own, that works for you too. Okay, so this would be an example of the open response questions. So I'm just gonna go through it and then take a couple minutes to think about what your answer would be. Graham forgot the names of the 2 personality disorders he was diagnosed with, but his therapy keeps discussing Graham's rule breaking and impulsivity. Graham knows that he has trouble having healthy relationships and maintaining his mood, which factors into his constant insensitivity to other people's boundaries. Before starting dialectal behavioral therapy, Graham's therapist shows him a picture and asks him to describe what's happening in the scene. Which 2 personality disorders would you believe he's diagnosed with and why? Which personality assessment did his therapist use? And what are the 3 phases of DBT? So take a couple minutes and try to think about what you would say if this was your exam question. Okay, you guys want to go over it or a couple more minutes? Okay, so generally for a question like this, the grading would be broken down into something like this. So 2 points for addressing antisocial personality, correct to Hernan, who got it right, who got all of this right. So 1 point for labeling it and 1 point for correctly explaining it. And then borderline personality for correctly labeling it and correctly explaining it. So what from here would make a person believe that this exemplifies antisocial personality? The rule breaking, yeah, they're avoiding people's boundaries, rather. Awesome. And the borderline personality would be the unstable relationships, mood, and impulsivity. And then the personality assessment would be the thematic apperception test and the DBT, which I didn't really explain that well before. So DBT more relies on focusing on a person's independence. So moving away from the dysfunctional and distressful behavior and cognition into independence and independent problem solving. So the first step of DBT would be to address the behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that a patient is having, then understanding the underlying causes or the traumatic experience or anything that's kind of like triggered all this negative behavior, thoughts, and emotions that the patient is having. And then finally, addressing the person's personality and independent problem solving so that they wouldn't necessarily have to rely on a therapist or anyone to solve these problems for them. Does this make sense?
So technically, So BPD is like a mood disorder, right? So you wouldn't just say mood disorder, you would have to name a specific one, right?
Wait, what? I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry. So you know how so I guess the professor is looking for specific like specific disorders, right? Not just the category.
Yeah. So for the first question, we're asked what two personality disorders. You would have to specify not just that they are personality disorders, but which ones. There have been situations where she's asked like the general
Yeah.
type. So it would ask like what category of disorder, and you'd have to say like anxiety disorder or PTSD or something like that. DBT would be a specific type of therapy, which generally is better for personality and mood disorders. But again, therapy, you don't necessarily have to have a disorder. And then just to try to remember the three phases of DBT.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
No problem. Something else to remember, sometimes in these questions, there is like a freebie point or something for like grammar or anything like that. So this is kind of why we tell you, even if you don't know the whole answer or you just want to guess or anything like that, it won't hurt. So are we good for this? Awesome. And then there is the COOT. Again, it's not mandatory, but it would help me and it would help you. So how can I cut this out? In case anyone gets kicked out or wants to join in the COOT later, I think you should be able to join like in the middle of the game. I'll just give it like a couple more minutes. Okay, just for the sake of time, if anyone needs to join in later, I think there's going to be a code at the bottom. Okay, which of these is not considered cheating on this exam? Please get this right. Awesome. So researching definitions is fine, using the textbook and notes are fine. Please don't call a psychologist in the middle of the exam. I don't think they want that. Nicole took an exam and failed. The professor assumed Nicole failed due to a family issue at home. The professor made awesome. Which of the following is not correctly described? Comorbidity is an increased chance of a disorder diagnosis because of a pre-existing diagnosis. Dysfunctional is behavioral cognition hindering a person's daily activity. Obsessive compulsive disorder is being very controlling and specific about details. And bipolar disorder, any of the bipolar disorders, is a fluctuation between depression and hypomanic or mania. Yes, so comorbidity is an increased chance of being diagnosed with one disorder because you already have another disorder. And bipolar is fluctuation between hypomanic or manic episodes or symptoms with depressive symptoms. Yes, so that wouldn't be being, I think I can show the thing. Yeah, being very controlling and specific about details would be OCPD, not OCD. Are we good on this one?
Wait, I thought comorbidity was also when you had like more than one disorder.
Yes, so for example, say I have, God forbid, say anyone has cancer and has an anxiety disorder. They can have two different disorders, but they're not really related. So in order for comorbidity to be the definition of comorbidity, the two disorders have to have some kind of relation or an increased chance of one because of the other.
Wait, why is it C again?
Because obsessive compulsive disorder, being very controlling and specific about details would be the personality disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder would be focusing on some kind of behavior to relieve the anxiety of
Oh, okay.
obsessing over something.
Thank you.
No problem. In what sport is the effect of social loafing not likely? So again, social loafing is part of social psychology, if that helps. Yeah, so because wrestling isn't a social sport, whereas crew baseball and basketball are team playing things. Which disorder best explains this behavior? Mark goes on a date to get General Tso chicken, his favorite meal. When he arrives, his boyfriend notices he isn't sitting with his normal straight posture and signs the check with an unusual signature with his left hand when he's usually right-handed. Through the meal, the boyfriend is constantly concerned that Mark seems disgusted by his plate and calls Mark's name multiple times before he realizes. These can be signs of which disorder? Yeah. So like we said, anything that affects different personalities, different identities, anything that we discussed in personality psychology, a dissociation from that, from the usual personality, might identify with the dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative amnesia would be more about memory or forgetting certain events or time periods. In personality psychology, you decide to play a video game instead of cleaning your room. When asked why your room wasn't cleaned, you lied to your parents and told them that you were busy doing homework. According to Michelle, I'm sorry, I still can't pronounce that name. When you decide to lie, is when your decision to lie is circumstantial, this is called yes, situationalism. So like we said, each behavior, each lie would be based on the situation for situationalism, whereas interactionalism would blame both the situation and the personality. So situationalism would say like I lied because like I'm winning in the game and I don't want to like pause the game. Or interactionalism would say I lied because my personality is kind of like mischievous, but also because I didn't want to give up the game. Did that make sense? Okay. In social psychology, John is watching a car commercial highlighting the car's capabilities. John John finds the car to be extremely reliable, so he buys the car the following week. The commercial John watched utilized which type of persuasion to persuade him into buying the car? Yeah, central rule. So because it focused on the car's features as opposed to like any other circumstances, he was influenced by the car. Occipital just means it has to do with vision. And normative would be going along just because like everyone else has the car, something like that. What form of culture oh, what form of culture factors is Angel displaying? So Angel loves to spend time with his family and tries his best not to disobey authority figures. But he also doesn't want to become a doctor, which is his family's goal for him. So he majors in theater. What form of culture factors is Angel displaying? Yes, it's both. So because it says Angel loves spending time with his family, he doesn't like to disobey them, that would be more focusing on the goal orientation, collectivism. And because he doesn't necessarily align with what the family has to do for him, he has his own individuality, would be a little individualistic as well. So it'd be both. Ramon, after taking an exam, always compares her exams to others to make herself feel better. What form of comparison is this? Awesome. So because she felt better, which means she was looking probably like down at other people, which is not an accurate difference between passionate and compassionate love. Awesome. So passionate usually comes first, and it's more sexual, more like in the heat of the moment. Compassionate is more based on trust, respect, empathy, so on. And it comes later on in the relationship. In psychological therapies, Sebastian goes to his therapist expressing how he feels he is anxious due to the pandemic. Psychoanalysis would explore deeper into his unconscious mind using either blank or blank techniques. to understand his childhood experiences and get a better understanding of his worries in the present day. So which therapy focuses on the unconscious and how? Awesome. So psychoanalysis mostly uses free association and dream analysis. Which disorder best explains this behavior? Mikey is starting preschool and seems to avoid interacting with other students. He has not shown signs of embarrassment or rule breaking and has conversations with his mother, but still seems uncomfortable. Which disorder might match? Autism spectrum. So it's not a communication disorder because it says he doesn't have anything like physically stopping him from communicating. He can't communicate with his mother. It's not avoidant because he's not particularly like, avoiding certain personalities. He's not feeling embarrassed or he's not rule breaking, which would be part of antisocial. So he's just having problems with social interactions. And specifically, I would focus on his age group, which it would be a factor into classifying autism. Which study is not part of social psychology? Awesome. Blank helps children develop a personality with high self-esteem and have a better chance to fulfill their personal growth. Awesome. So conditions of worth would most likely lower self-esteem because a person feels like something is dependent on. So like my mother only loves me because I clean the dishes or I clean my room. External locus of control, high self-esteem can come with either external or internal. And psychodynamic, same thing. Why are drugs from a specific category sometimes effective in treating a different psychological disorder? Awesome. So like we said, neuropsychologists often compare thoughts and behavior into chemicals and electricity. So many of the same disorders, most likely the ones that have higher comorbidity chances, use the same neurotransmitters, the same chemicals in the brain. So the same drug can help different disorders. Maggie gets so frustrated after failing an exam that she studies extra hard for another exam for a different class. Which defense mechanism would this be an example of? Sublimation. Good. So it wouldn't necessarily be displacement because she's redirecting that temperament into something positive. She's studying for another class. It wouldn't be rationalization because she's not trying to like justify it. She's not saying like, I couldn't study for it or the exam was super hard or anything like that. She's using that emotion into something positive. What type of therapy is being described? Anna comes to her therapist and explains how she scored poorly on an exam, believing that that will cost her a poor grade for the course, affecting her GPA and pushing her back in her degree. The therapist will stop the intrusive thoughts and shift her mindset to scoring poorly on the exam means I have to identify what went wrong to improve. Awesome. So they're changing how she thinks and feels about the event. Awesome. How do cultural beliefs affect psychological treatments? Awesome. So each culture has like a different mindset on what psychology is and how to treat it. In personality psychology, Steve has been diagnosed with a binge eating disorder. When stressed, he resorts to binge eating. When he doesn't have food available, his pleasure principle, and what is related to his pleasure principle, convinces him to steal. Freud would say he has a fixation in which psychosexual stage? Awesome. So the id is more related to the pleasure principle, and anything that has to do with the mouth, eating, smoking, talking, is an oral fixation. Okay. You guys all did awesome in this review. Good job to JS, Wendell, and Ashley. Awesome. Now, are there any questions or anything that I glanced over? Anything else about the exam?
No, I think I just gotta study on my own, but not bad so far.
Awesome. Again, the exam is on Tuesday. Feel free to reach out to me, Dr. Zambrano, or any of the TAs for any questions, anything that we can help, and good luck.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Yeah, so all the TA emails are in like the first section or the second section on Blackboard. So my email is br386 at Scarlet Mail.